Today's daf is daf Mem Hey, and we'll begin with the Mishnah about 10 lines down from the top of the Yomud. At the end of his Nazirus, the Nazir brings karbonos and he's megaleach in a certain place in the Beis Hamikdash, and we'll see exactly all those dinim. And then after he does his giluach, having brought his karbonos, or at least one of the three, as we'll see, then he's allowed to drink wine, be metame l'mesim, and he has terminated his nazirus. Tiglachas hatara. In the case of a nazir who is tahar, and at the end of his nazirus, he brings his karbonos, ketzad. What's the say there? The sequence of his karbonos and his tiglachas. Hayamevi sholosh behemos. The Torah requires in Parshas Naso that the Nazir, at the end of his Nazirus, and we're talking about a Nazir Tar, brings three karbonos. Number one, he brings a kivsa lechatos. Number two, a keves liola, and finally an ayel shlomim. V'shocheres hashlomim, first of the three, this is the first Tana Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, is the shlomim. The shlomim comes first. And Tosas explains that according to Rabbi Yehuda, since he's megaleach ala shlomim, therefore he should bring the shlomim first. Tosas asks Akasha, why doesn't the Mishnah mention shlomim in this list, the enumerated list, as the first on the list? In any event, megaleach alehem, after he brought his carbon shlomim, he does his giluach, and afterwards, he's allowed to drink wine, etc., etc. De Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lezer Omer, he holds that the most important carbon of the three is in fact the carbon chatas, and therefore lo hayim megaleach ela ala chatas lechatchila. If everything was done perfectly according to Rabbi Lezer, then after the chatas is brought, then he is megaleach. Shachatas kodemes b'chol makom. And this is a universal halacha that doesn't apply exclusively to Nazir. And the Gemara in Zvachim Adaf Tzadi derives this from the pasuk in Vayikra Hey. It says Vayakriv es asher lachatas rishona. So chatas in general gets first priority, and that applies to Nazir as well. We'll try to figure out why Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of Nazir, places the shlomim as the first of the three karbonos, but Rabbi Lezer is applying a universal rule that chatas always comes first, and so too in Nazir, lechatchila, if everything is perfect, then he brings his chatas first, and then he's allowed to do his tiglachas, fulfill his mitzvah, and be Messiah his nazirus. However, what happens b'di'evet? And this is going to be true both according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lezer, and Gilach al achas mishloshtan yotza, which means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, instead of bringing the shlomim, he brought one of the other two karbonos, either the chatas or the ola. And according to Rabbi Lezer, instead of bringing the chatas first, he brought either the shlomim or the ola. And in Gilach al Achas Mishloshtem, he went ahead and he did his Giluach following one of the three karbonos, any of the three, Yotza, he has fulfilled his mitzvah, and he terminates his Nazirus. But again, Lechatchila, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he brings the Shlomim first, and then does Tiglachas, according to Rabbi Lezer, Chatas first, and then Tiglachas. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Hevi sholosh behemos v'lo pirish. What happens if he sets aside three animals, a kivsach, keves, and an ayil for his karbonos, but lo pirish, he didn't designate. Now, the halacha is that in order to be magdish an animal as a zevach lemizbeach, you have to mention what the nature of the carbon is. He didn't do so. He just took three animals, again, three different animals of three different species, and he declared Elu Linazirusai. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that indeed these three behemos will each respectively have Kedushas Karban. haru'ila chatos, the kizpah will tikarev chatos to be brought as a chatos, that which is ru'ila ola, which means the keves will be tikarev li ola, and finally the ayel l'shlamim, tikarev shlamim will be brought as a carbon shlamim. So it means that in the case of this set of three animals, he doesn't have to magnish them individually, one after the other. He can have a generic kind of hakadosh of Elul in Nazirosai, but since we see that he was absolutely definite about being magnish these three karbanos, there was no doubt in his mind. That's why he chose these three different species of animals. Therefore, each animal will be brought as it was royal carbon. The Gemara says, Tarabana. The Gemara now wants to understand what is the source of Rabbi Yehuda's Shita that a Nazir is megalech on carbon shlamim and giving shlamim the precedence. And this brisa quotes the pasuk in Naso, V'gilach ha-Nazir Pesach Oel Moed. Now it doesn't say exactly which carbon is being brought here, Pesach Oel Moed, and the Giluach follows that carbon. And here's the way Rabbi Yehuda learns it. Bishlamim akosu b'daber. When the pasuk says v'gilach, it's referring to gilach al carbon shlamim shenemar, and we're going to have here a gzeres shava because here it says Pesach Oel Moed in giluach of a Nazir, and in Vayikra Gimel in the parsha of carbon shlamim, likewise it says Pesach Oel Moed v'ushchato Pesach Oel Moed. And since Pesach Oel Moed in Vayikra Gimel is referring explicitly to Shlamim, therefore Pesach Oel Moed in the parsha of Karbonos Nazir likewise is referring to Shlamim. And for Gilach HaNazir, Pesach Oel Moed means after he brought the carbon which is designated by the Torah as Pesach Oel Moed, which is the carbon Shlamim. Okay, so all this reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda that the carbon shlamim is the carbon that precedes the giluach. The Brisa asks the following question: Ata Omer b'shlamim akosu b'daber. Do you really have a proof that the words Pesach Oel Moed in the parsha of Tiglachas Nazir refer to the shlamim? Oh, perhaps I could offer an alternative possibility. Eino ella Pesach Oel Moed Mamsh. Maybe the Torah's intention here was to tell us that the Giluach should take place in a certain location. The words Pesach Oel Moed do not refer to the carbon following which he does his tiglachas, but rather to the location in which he does his tiglachas. And the Torah is teaching me that the Nazir is required to implement his Giluach Se'ar at the point of Pesach Oel Moed. And the Gemara now is going to analyze whether or not this is a feasible possibility. And the Brisa says, Amart, I'm going to tell you that this is not a possibility. Why? Im kain derech bizayinu. Pesach Oel Moed means right before the Kodesh. That's not a place where a person's going to be shaving his hair, meaning in this case, the Nazir, even though he's doing it for a mitzvah, but still, it's not appropriate behavior. The Torah is not coming to tell you that that's exactly where the location that the Giluach should take place, Pesach Oel Moed, that would be Bizayin. But rather, the Torah is telling you with which carbon is going to precede the Giluach, and that's the carbon of Pesach Oel Moed, namely the carbon Shlamim. And now the Gemara is going to offer a number of different alternative approaches to derive this conclusion that the Nazir is not going to do his tiglachas in that location, Pesach Oel Moed. Rabbi Yoshua Omer ein tzorach. I don't need your logic of derech bizayon to prove and to establish that the Giluach is not Pesach Ol Moed. I have a Kal V'chomer. Harei Amr Torah, when it comes to a Kohen who's walking up the steps towards the Mizbeach, the Torah tells us in Parshas Yisro that Lo Sala B'Malos Al Mizbechi, that there are two ways of climbing up to the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach was 10 amah high. One is by climbing up the steps. The other one is through the kevesh, right? The ramp that leads him up to the Migdash, up to the Mizbeach, top of the Mizbeach. And the Torah prohibits walking up the steps. And why is that? Because they used to wear like long cloaks. And when the Kohen would climb up the steps, we have to worry about the possibility that a private place of his body, which is called in Hebrew an erva, might be exposed to the steps of the Mizbeach as he picks up one leg and then climbs to the other leg, and lifting up the leg might expose his privates to the steps leading up to the Mizbeach. That's not derech kavod. The Torah prohibits this. And we're going to make an analogy with a Kal V'chomer to our case of a Nazir. And in the first case, when the Torah says Lo Sali, you're talking about a Kohen who's going up the steps to the Mizbeach to do the Avodah. Kal V'chomer Nazir, who is being megaleach his seir as a mitzvah, but he's not even doing it for the purpose of avoda, is derech bizayon. That's really a bizayon. And it doesn't make sense that the tiglachas, which has no shaychus whatsoever to the avodas kodesh, should be more permissible than walking up the steps, climbing the steps for the sake of the avodas hakodesh. And now we have Rabbi Yitzchak. But before we have Rabbi Yitzchak, I just want to mention here in my Gemara, we have a Nusach Acher. I'm not sure, it should be published in your Gemaras as well. And this Nusach Acher is almost identical to what we learned. And it comes from a Medrash Rav in Parshas Naso. And the Medrash is darshaning that pasuk that we're learning now. V'gilach ha-Nazir Pesach Ol Moed. Rabbi Yoshia Omer b'Shlomo HaKosim V'David. The words Pesach Ol Moed do not refer to the location for the Tiglachas, but rather to the carbon which precedes the Tiglachas. So Eino V'chule, meaning perhaps you'll say that Pesach Ol Moed refers to the location. Im Kach Omer Torah. How can it be? The Torah says, "Lo sal b'malos al mizbechi," so there won't be a gili erva on his way up when he's climbing towards the mizbeach. That's not derech kavod. It's kal v'chomer, much more so that it's a bizayon shelo yigaleach pesach ol moed ela b'shlom hakosim edam. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Nitzarach, he has a different svara to derive the conclusion that the giluach of Pesach Ol Moed would certainly be excluded because it's a derech bizayon. Shareu Omer, it says in Parshas Nazir immediately after the Giluach, V'lakach es si'ar rosh nizro v'nasan ala eish. The Torah requires that after he cuts his hair, he takes the hair by his hand and he throws it into the fire. This is the fire that is burning. The Torah says, Asher tacha azevach hashlovim, under the pot in which they're cooking the shlomim. Now notice there are two actions here that are being designated in this pasuk. There's v'lokach and there's v'nasan. Nothing in the middle. And that's called Misha Eina Mechusar El Lekicha Unesina. Yotze Zeshu Mechusar Lekicha Hava Unesina. There are three actions possible, and the Torah excludes the middle one. There's Lekicha, there's Hava, and then there's Nesina. And what would that mean? That would mean the following. The Torah excludes Hava by telling us that immediately after the lekicha, meaning after the Nazir takes the seir that he cut off into his hand, immediately he takes it and he burns it. Now, the shlomim was not cooked in Pesach Ol Moed. It was in a different location. In fact, it could be anywhere in Yerushalayim, but let's say it was in the Lishkas HaNazir. There were 4 Lishakos in the Ezras Nashim. One of them was called the Lishkas HaNazirim, and that's where the Nazirim would take their korban shlomim, and they would cook it, and they would do the giluach there and put the seir immediately underneath the pot in which the shlom was cooked. And this took place not in Pesach Ol Moed, but rather in one of the lishakos in the Azara. And that's where they were mevashel the shlom. Now, if you're going to tell me that the giluach has to take place by Pesach Ol Moed, then we're going to need not only lekicha and not only nesina, but the nesina is in the lishkas ha-nazirim, which is in the Ezras Nashim. We're going to need hava to bring the seir from the Pesach Ol Moed over to the lishkas ha-nazirim, where they're burning the shlomim. And then you're adding another activity that, so to speak, interrupts the flow that is meant to be number 1, Nesina, Lekicha, number 2, Nesina. Now you have Hava in between. And that forces us to reinterpret the words El Pesach Ol Moed, and they cannot be interpreted as referring to the location, because then you'd be Mechusar Hava, but rather Pesach Ol Moed refers to the korban shlomim. Ika di Amri. Others have a different transmission of the words of Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, how do I know that Vigilach HaNazir Pesach Ol Moed does not refer to the location, but rather to the korban? Ata Omer sheb'shlom HaKos Medabro Eino Ela Pesach Ol Moed Mamish, which is going to be, we'll soon see the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. But in any event, Rabbi Yitzchak says in his brisa that it cannot refer to Pesach Ol Moed Mamish as a location identified for the Nesina of the Seyar. Talmud Lomar, the Torah says, "V'gilach HaNazir Pesach Ol Moed es Rosh Nizro, v'lokach es Si'ar Rosh Nizro, v'nasan ala Eish asher tachas zevach hashlomim." So the Torah has the mitzvah of Giluach written immediately before the Sreifas HaSeir. So we have here in the pasuk V'gilach, and then immediately it says V'nosan ala Eish. And that means that the mitzvah of Giluach, which follows with the mitzvah of Sreifas HaSeir, is Makom Shehoya Mevashel Shom Hoya Megaleach. The place where the bishul of the Shlomim of the Nazir took place, that's where he did the Giluach. Because the Torah places the mitzvah of Giluach contiguous to the mitzvah of Sreifas HaSeir. And the Sreifas HaSeir took place in the Makom Shoyim Mevashel. That's where he burnt the hair. And it wasn't at the Pesach Ol Moed. And if the pasuk is not to be read kipshuto, that he should do the Giluach Pesach Ol Moed, then Pesach Ol Moed must be referring to the korban shlomim. Abu Chanan Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer v'gilach hanozir Pesach Ol Moed. The Torah does not refer to the location of the Giluach as Pesach Ol Moed Mamish, and rather the word Pesach is Kol Zman she'ein Pesach Oel Moed Pasuch Eino Megaleh. According to Abba Chanan, we have a whole new interpretation of what does Pesach Ol Moed refer to? What does it mean? And what it means is that if let's say the Nazir comes early, he daven vasikin, he comes to the Beis Hamikdash, he's ready to do his giluach, but they haven't yet opened the doors of the Heichal. And El Pesach Ol Moed tells me that his tiglachas could only take place after they open the doors of the Heichal. He's going to have to wait there until Psichas Dalsos HaHeichal. And then and only then does he do his giluach. So again, now we have a third interpretation of El Pesach Ol Moed. Number one is Karban Shlomim. Number two, it would refer to the exact location of his giluach. And number three, it's referring to the fact that there must be psichas dalsos ha'eichel. And that middle possibility that we mentioned, we'll see now in the Shita of one of the Tanoim. So first we have Rav Shimon Zuri Omer. He has a different derivation of the conclusion that the Nazir does not do. He is of that middle opinion that the Nazir, in fact, does the Giluach Pesach Ol Moed, and he rejects all the other Tanoim. He's going to interpret the pasuk kipshuto, straightforward, and he's going to derive a miut the Gilach HaNazir Pesach Ol Moed v'lo Nazira. The pasuk of HaNazir refers to a male Nazir and not a female Nazir. And the Gemara is going to explain now momentarily exactly why a Nazir should not be performing her Giluach Pesach Ol Moed.